we have the two big defenders of the ocean. So I would like to invite Professor Hoi-Sung Lee, the chair of the IPCC, and Ambassador Peter Thompson, the UN Secretary General Special Envoy on the Ocean, to come to the stage. So, Ambassador Thompson, Professor Lee, the IPCC has put an enormous effort on creating this report and passing some important messages. So we have planned this to be a dialogue between you and a dialogue between the audience. But let me start with some key questions. So, Professor Lee, what are the key findings of the special report relevant to the ocean and the cryosphere in this changing climate? And what is the new evidence of the benefits of keeping the global warming to the 1.5 degree?
You've seen the worsening impacts on the ocean cryosphere of these rising temperatures and other climate indicators. And all these impacts clearly indicate that the rate of change is so fast that the adaptive capacity of ecosystems as well as the human systems may not be available to cope with this rapidly increasing, worsening impact on oceans and cryosphere. And warming of oceans turned out to be much faster, the acidification much severer, and also loss of oxygen turned out to be much more severe, and also loss of ice in both the poles turned out to be much more severe than previously understood. And these limits to adaptation implies that we may have a very little scope for utilize the eco-friendly adaptation methods, for instance, like sustainable fisheries, ecosystem-based adaptation, and sustainable other maritime management may only be effective under the very low emission scenarios, which implies that the importance of taking early, immediate greenhouse gas emissions reduction. We need to reduce globally the emissions of greenhouse gas right now, so that within the next 10 years we should be able to be in a very good position of reaching down to net zero by mid of this century. I believe this is the main message from this special report on ocean and cryosphere.
So, Professor Lee, you have a warning here that we might reaching the tipping point of how our ecosystems can support the life. On the other side, we have a lot of noise saying that it's too expensive to address climate change. What are the benefits if we will address the issue, as you said, very urgent and with drastic greenhouse gas reduction?
I think your question is very important one, because so long a time that we have understood the climate issues in terms of threats, in terms of crisis, in terms of emergency. But I want to emphasize that our studies, including this one, as well as including the earlier one, that is the special report on 1.5 degrees, and also special report on land, clearly indicates that by taking early actions, we will be able to generate a great deal of benefit to our economy, to our society. Let me give you an example. This taking early action, immediate action, will give us an opportunity to invest, opportunity for investment in new technology, innovation, and opportunity for investment in the low carbon technologies, as well as opportunities for investment in improving the efficiency of energy use, that is, improving the productivity of energy use, as well as the productivity of resource use, so that in the end, the humanity's demand for resources and energy will be contained. And this will be a very good news for our living world. Not only good for the ecosystem, but as well as good for our human being. And as you know very well, this new investment will have a tremendous, what we call an external benefit, spilling over effect on other sectors than the energy industry itself. It will spill over to all other sectors, including the transportation sectors, including to the residential building structures, including the urban sectors. All other sectors humanity has to absorb, and it will increase the overall efficiency of the economy, overall effectiveness of how society organizes activities. And this new investment will also improve our understanding about how we can achieve this transition in a more inclusive way, in a more equitable way. And we believe that by taking early action, we increase the possibility of attaining these sustainable development goals earlier than what we plan to achieve.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Ambassador Thompson, I remember you were the week of 2 to 6 September in Bangkok when we had the Asia Pacific Climate Week, and you were in a high-level panel and someone asked you, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future? And you replied it's not if I'm optimistic or pessimistic, we need to look at the facts. So Professor Lee has presented the facts. I mean, and my question to you is, do you see policymakers taking these facts? And if not, what are the messages that we should pass to them?
Thank you very much, Stefanos. I think what I said in Bangkok was there's not much use choosing between optimism and pessimism. You've got to be pragmatists. We all have to be pragmatists. The choice is between being pragmatic about the work ahead and sitting under a coconut tree and having a nice beer and reading a novel. That's the choice. So it's basically apathy versus pragmatism. And hopefully everybody that made the effort to come to this blue cop is a pragmatist. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the scientists. You know, Professor Lee represents this IPCC group who, you know, they're not a bunch of people standing on Hyde Park Corner in London expressing their views. This is the best of our Earth scientists, the best that humanity has on these questions of Earth science. And they have produced this year 3 landmark reports, one on land use and one on the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees climate warming, and this third one on ocean and cryosphere. And if you take their 3 reports from our best scientists and put them together with the IPBES report, which is the biodiversity twin of IPCC, and they did a report, that's the one I'm sure you read about in the press, which shows that 1 million species are about to go extinct because of our actions, right? And then I'd just like to make another word for another group of scientists who IUCN put together to write the the ocean deoxygenation report, which was launched last night, which is showing that our human activities are driving oxygen from the ocean at a steady rate. And I just want to thank the scientists. You know, I think they're doing their job. So Professor Lee, congratulations on raising these warning flags through these reports. The job is for the rest of us, politicians, bureaucrats, citizens, to make sure that the warnings that have been given are translated into action. And I do believe that comes down to individuals, but of course it goes all the way up to the multilateral bodies which bring together the governments. And the governments are all going to have to go into this super year, which we have coming up, 2020, the super year in which, you know, the UN Ocean Conference, the UN Biodiversity Conference in Kunming, in a year's time in Glasgow, the UNFCCC conference where all our countries go and they put in enhanced nationally determined contributions, which will hopefully be, if you take that whole package together, enough to set us on the course for the last decade that we have, up till 2030, to get things right on planet Earth. So I do believe the scientists have done their bit. It's now up to the rest of us to put that into practice and into positive action, pragmatic action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So to put them in action, and you're interacting with policymakers every day, I would say, what you would say to them to start acting upon?
Well, from the ocean point of view, something that was very much absent in the past was an ocean element of their NDCs. In Glasgow next year, we want to see strong ocean component in the NDCs. I think you'll agree with me, Paul. The ocean was very underrepresented at the Paris Agreement. You know, we had because the ocean there, a few other things like that. But the ocean has to be much more part of the climate discussion. And that's thankfully happening now. You know, we're at a blue COP. This was just a dream a few years ago. But finally, people are recognizing that, you know, the ocean is the driver of the climate system on the planet and must be an essential part of these discussions. So what I'm pushing with every government that I meet is, please, make sure you have a strong ocean component in your NDCs when you come to Glasgow. I mean, things like blue carbon. You know, blue carbon is so much more effective than green carbon on land. You know, the mangroves, the seagrass, and so on. Make sure that your NDCs talk about the restoration and the protection of blue carbon in your countries.
Thank you, Ambassador. Professor Lee, many times there's some noise, even from the media, saying that, you know, the scientists are doing their reports, but the policymakers do not hear, or the scientists are doing the reports, but the messages are not passing to them. So, based on the findings of the special report, what action should policymakers and other stakeholders consider to support implementation and acceleration of implementation of the SDG 14?
Thank you very much for the question. You indicated that there's some gap or disconnect between science and the policies taking action, and we live in a very complicated world, you know, and we hope that the world will be so nice that once science is delivered, then next moment the policy action that should take. But the world doesn't work in that way. We recognize that the complexities of the policy making, and also we recognize the policy action should be able to consider all the consequences of taking climate actions, and it is the one part of achieving a just transition. So we believe that this thoughtful policy making will inevitably deliver us a just, equitable transition, and because this transition is based upon a rock-solid science. And what we need from now is to have some little bit more understanding from the social science aspect of decision making and policy implementation. And with regard to the specific questions about how the policy options can be effective in achieving this 1.5, these three special reports, 1.5, ocean, land, consistently indicate that if we are able to constrain the future growth of energy demand, then achieving 1.5 goal will be quite feasible, because the constrained energy demand for the future implies that we would have a circular economy, we would have an economy with much higher productivity, not only for energy resource, but as well as other materials resource. This will be close to a much less footprint, not only carbon footprint, but materials footprints on the planet of our continued economic and societal growth. The next point is we should be able to achieve this transition from the current carbon-intensive structure to the alternative one. In this case, alternative one is clearly a zero-carbon structure. And right now, the cost of zero-carbon technology is somehow thought to be expensive compared to a conventional technologies. But there are a number of indications that the cost reductions of zero-carbon technologies are much faster than expected, as well as the cost in certain cases, site-specific cases. We do have a number of examples that zero carbon technologies compete much better than the conventional fuels. So if R&D and technology investment gave us a tremendous result, which I believe that will be, then sooner or later the transition will be cost effective, in the sense that the market itself will be able to support the transition without needing any advice, or without needing any subsidy, or without needing any government policy or interventions. The point is, we should make the market support the transition. Let me give an example. We all know the so-called the shale revolution in the North America. And now that shale revolution just occurred in terms of long history of energy world, occurred, let's say, overnight. And it was due to a remarkable appearance of disruptive technologies in oil and gas exploration. And that changed the picture of the oil and gas industry around the world, especially North America. Now, transition implies that that's sort of a disruptive technological shift. Now, in the case of energy transition, to achieve the 1.5 degrees is more than a shale revolution, because it is a shift away from fossil to the non-fossil energy sectors. So we should expect a lot more, may I say, a interesting and exciting drama for a shift away from the current structure to the zero carbon energy world. We have seen, in the case of shale transitions, we have seen a number of interesting developments in the oil and gas industries. I expect that a number of interesting and also very technology intensive and also market relevant changes will occur in a very short period of time, supporting this transition from the fossil fuel world to the zero carbon world. Again, the point is, we should let the market serve the transformation, not the other way around.
Professor Lee, this is an extremely important message, because indeed if the market will not pick up, we cannot sustain any progress we will have. But can I dare to ask you, why you think that the market is not picking up very fast? Because in many times we say, that innovators will pick up the messages and they would like to innovate first, and they will drive a big transformational changes. What is missing from the market right now to go from the pilot and small cases to massive production of production and actually selling of massive zero carbon technologies?
Well, clearly the pricing system at this moment is not working well, because the carbon emissions generate tremendous damage to the global ecosystem, and also as well as the human systems. And pricing on carbon emissions is the way to correct that unjustified, inadmissible emissions of the hydrocarbon use. So pricing on carbon is clearly the one mechanisms to correct the failure of the market. And also we know that a number of cases for subsidy to the existing conventional fuels, and those practices need to be corrected as well. And also there are certain segments of the society and economy that do not well respond to the price signals, and there we should also consider regulatory and rule-based approach, so that the economy as a whole will be able to move on to this zero carbon pathways.
Thank you, Professor Lee. It's music to my ears, and the next time we will put something in a report of ESCAP to our intergovernmental bodies, we will quote you, because then we will know that we have some good justification. Ambassador Thompson, Professor Lee talked about subsidies, talked about market mechanisms. How, and I've heard also you talking about different mechanisms for conserving the ocean. So how we can leverage interlinkage between ocean action and climate action around the different options we have on making things more sustainable?
Yeah, look, as an advocate for SDG 14, the ocean goal, I would have to say I'm less trusting of markets and governments than maybe the rest of you. I believe in advocacy, strong advocacy, bashing heads together and saying we've got to do this. Why? I mean, we're in trouble. Did you hear the Secretary General, what he said at the beginning of the Blue COP? Humanity, this is his public statement, his opening statement to us all. Again, not a guy on a street corner, the Secretary General of the United Nations. Governments come and governments go, but the UN remains. That's our leadership for humanity on this planet. And he said, the head of the Secretary General, humanity is knowingly destroying the life support system of this planet. He based it on the IPCC reports, IPBES report, and so on. He based that comment on science. And when you hear that, I would have to say, no, governments and the markets are not doing enough. And they have to have their heads banged together to make them do more. And that's why next year, this super year, we expect them to deliver. Humanity expects. Now, how does the market work? Obviously, consumers have a very important part to play in this. And if you are part of that group that I described, the apathetic group, sipping Chardonnays on the beach, as opposed to being the pragmatists who are out there making the difference, then you're part of the problem. So, what are we going to do about it? Well, we do have this plan in place, obviously, which is the Paris Agreement, and we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and stick to that plan, implement it with integrity, and we'll be okay. But it's not being implemented, folks, fast enough. It definitely is, and that again was the Secretary General's message. It's not being implemented fast enough. The ocean has taken 90% of the heat out of the climate system since the 1970s. We are witnessing, since the 1980s, a doubling of the rate of the water temperature. We're getting doubling of the heat waves that we get in the ocean. If you've ever seen the results of a heat wave, and I have, it's tragic, where the animals just come on the beach and they die. It's too hot for them in the water. There's no more oxygen for them in the water, because when the water heats, the gas goes out of it. No oxygen, nothing to breathe. I've seen that in Africa. I've seen it in my own country of Fiji. So, it's not working at the moment. We're going in the wrong direction at the moment. We have a plan. We have to implement it with a lot more integrity than we have been. And we've got this super year coming up, which is the opportunity for governments and hopefully the markets, in response to what consumers, demand of the market, which is, a world free of single-use plastic. No more illegal fish, no more subsidizing of industrial fleets to go out there and rob the oceans. There's 33% of the wild stock being overfished. All these insanities that our governments are part of need to stop in the super year. We need to come out of the super year at the end of next year and know that we're on course to implement the plan which we set ourselves by 2030.
Thank you, Ambassador. You mentioned all these crises, fish stock, overfished, the capacity of the ocean to regulate the climate is going down. I don't believe that government and policy makers are insane people. So why do you think they don't see and act very, very fast on this?
Well, if you're talking about the fishing industry, short-term governments supporting the people that own the fishing fleets that demand the subsidies so that they can have their fuel paid for, so they can go out to our part of the world from this part of the world and talk to African coastal fisheries people. Those industrial fleets are stripping the ocean. And by the way, I can also say, since we're on fishing, because I can see a lot of Africans in the room, bad luck for us equatorial people, because life is leaving. the ocean. That's being shown by the scientific reports that are coming out as well. In our part of the world, the tuna, our main source of income for many of our countries in the Southwest Pacific, is leaving. By the end of the 21st century, it'll all be over on the South American coast. So, again, this is science telling us what's happening. So, are they acting fast enough? No, I say again, governments are not acting fast enough. We are not reacting fast enough to what is going on, and we need to fast. And I'm not sure if I answered your question now, except for forgotten what it is.
Well, Ambassador, I think that if this question is answered, action will happen immediately the next day.
Okay, so I think you asked what are we doing as a whole. Look, just have a look at SDG 14. It covers the full gamut, right?
Yeah.
Basically 5 things. If you think about what's going wrong in the ocean, just remember these 5 things. And they're all supported by science. First one, fisheries. Right? We got big problems there, as I said, the subsidies, the harmful subsidies, that's in the SDGs. WTO has not done its job yet. They're supposed to lift those subsidies by the end of this year, and member states are lagging there. Hopefully they'll get the job done next year. Second one is pollution. What we are sending down our rivers in sewage, in nutrient offlow from agriculture, industrial pollution, and of course you all know about the plastic plague that has been unleashed onto the ocean and onto ourselves because it's coming back to bite us. So those 2, pollution and fisheries. But the pernicious 3, the remaining 3, which are with us for hundreds of years, whatever we do to get things right tomorrow, are ocean warming. If you think ocean warming, think rising sea levels, think death of coral, think our species leaving us in the tropics and going polewards. Ocean acidification, think no more shellfish, because how can they build their shells if the ocean is acid? And third one is deoxygenation. If you haven't read it yet, see the IUCN report that was launched here at the Blue COP, because it's telling us unequivocally that we are driving oxygen out of the ocean. So I'm saying we're not winning this war. It's a war. At least we know we've got a war now. So let's do better in defending ourselves, and more importantly, defending the life support system of the planet, of which the ocean is the base.
Thank you, Ambassador. One more short question to Professor Lin, and I will open it to the floor then. Ambassador is mentioning all these problems that, as he said, it's not only today's, it's 100 years of problems. And science also is behind this. What you would say as the main message is to the policymakers that they still deny that these problems exist?
Anyone denying the science messages really would be denying the benefits that they could get by accepting the scientific findings and take actions required to avoid this damaging effect on ocean and cryosphere. Anyone objecting to taking action or hesitant to taking this action would amount to investing in an assets of which value will decline to zero in a very short period of time, because we are quite sure that the decades from now will be a transition decade from this traditional energy structure to something else. That something else is zero carbon energy structure. Now, not taking action means investment in the traditional energy assets whose value will decline, certainly. Of all uncertainties we have, we can be quite sure of that possibility of decline in the traditional fossil assets. So the choice is very obvious, whether we should choose for investment in a winning assets or whether we choose an investment in a losing assets. So I think any rational person will take the right decision, right course of action. I don't really believe anyone seriously hesitate taking the early action. And considering that the innovation, investment in innovation will give us tremendous external benefit, not only in the energy sector, but all throughout the economy. That will give us additional impetus for us to take very, very immediate early action.
Thank you, Professor Lee. And Ambassador, I think this is pragmatism, as you call it, correct? So we're a little bit over the half of the event. I would like to open it to the floor for some questions. Anyone that wants, if you can let us know where you're coming from and.
Hi, my name is Paula. I'm actually a volunteer at this club, and I'm actually from Colombia, and in my country we have around 40 rivers. And I wanted to ask you, from a situation that we lived 3 years ago, the 40 rivers that we have, it can be said that we're currently experiencing a tragedy on the commons, whereby the fishing and all humans are trying to exploit these rivers. Until 3 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled, setting a clear precedent that a specific river was being subject to rights, meaning that it has rights, and anybody who infringes will be prosecuted. So my question is, do you think that conferring rights or granting rights to bodies of water which are to the relative size of rivers, do you think that conferring rights to natural things is a viable solution for frameworks or policies that governments can enact towards pushing for the conservation of water?
Thank you. I don't know, Professor, would you like rights to non-human beings?
Right. It is a common properties and how to preserve the common resources for the benefit of the community. May I understand the question correctly? All right. The property right has a lot to do with the proper management of environmental quality. And in the most literature dealing with this problem indicate that in an extreme case, if property rights can be established for the common environmental resources, then the conclusion suggests that we may not need to have a specific environmental policy or environmental or regulation standard at all, because the negotiations between the parties, given the basis of his or her own ownership of certain part of the property, those negotiations will deliver the most optimal resolutions. Now, extending that, the theory would give us the overall understanding that establishing a reasonably workable property rights on common resources will give us a result, as you said, result of increasing the conservation effect as well as preservation or restoration effect. So in theory, and also in certain cases of practical examples, those in allowing or establishing a proper property rights serves well for the effective restoration and preservation of resources. Now, this property right argument cannot be applied to the climate change because it is a global problems. Carbon emission is a global problems, and you cannot allocate property rights for the certain portion of atmosphere to you or my as my property. So it is an entirely different mechanism, and therefore that's the reason why 195 member governments of UNFCCC have to meet together to work out a appropriate arrangements to arrive at most agreeable result to limit the greenhouse gas emissions and also achieve the climate stabilization.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice question. New Zealand has done the same thing, given legal rights to a particular river, I think a couple of them. It's a lovely idea. I also think that species actually demand their legal rights as well. And a lot of people see the super year in that way, a new deal for nature, because we treated it as an exploitation of something that we can just carry on in a linear way. Hopefully we'll come to our senses next year and realize that is not sustainable. Yeah.
So, one from the gentleman with a very nice red tie.
Thank you. My name is Wilbur Otichilo. I'm a governor in one of the regions in Kenya. Ambassador Peter, the issue of subsidies on fossil energy is what is driving carbon emissions to unprecedented levels. What is the UN doing and other UN-related agencies to ensure that they come up with a resolution to bind countries to reduce or remove subsidies on fossil energy?
Well, I think your question is very much in harmony with what Professor Lee was saying earlier. The UN is driven by member states. Kenya is a very important member of the United Nations. In fact, you're co-hosting with Portugal the UN Ocean Conference next year, so you're in a position of real strength to influence that subsidies argument. I mean, SDG 14, which our conference in Lisbon is all about, which your president and President of Portugal are hosting, we've got subsidies in there. We're supposed to get rid of all those fuel subsidies that are given to the fishing industry, right? So that's an example. But fossil fuel subsidies generally, why do we have these? It's such a distortion, and I think we would move so much faster to the renewable energy future that is our obvious future if these subsidies are removed. But it's not for the UN to do it. It's for member states to tell the UN what to do, and a couple of countries have to stand up, make a resolution, then fight it through. That's the way it works at the UN.
Thank you, Pastor. So one more from the young man there, which is the future. I have a second, a third, and a fourth. And Ambassador, I'll give you the last question, I promise.
Ron Tarter from Sustainable Ocean Alliance. So I wanted to ask, Ambassador, you mentioned a sort of plethora of problems that we're facing and then the science that has come out from the IPCC reports. Do you think that we're fighting this war and we're fighting it on many fronts? Do you think that we need to triage at some point? And is there science that sort of says where we would focus that triage, for example?
My English is kind of limited. I come from Fiji, but I thought triage was a medical term, is it? What does it mean?
So I mean where you basically, that some problems are not worth your efforts because you can't solve them in the amount of time, but you could maybe save one issue, so you should go to that. So it's basically prioritizing where the efforts go because there's urgency on all fronts.
I got you. Look, I think the big thing about the super year, and that sounds gimmicky, but this is a really important year for us next year. The big thing about it is to bring together the biodiversity challenge, the climate challenge, and the ocean challenge as one thing, right? And just understand that, basically, greenhouse gas emissions are our common enemy. That should be the starting point, and let's get away from fossil fuels as quickly as we possibly can. That should be the starting point, right? That's just like kind of building the fortress if you are going to carry on with that wartime analogy. So the first thing is that get rid of the greenhouse gas emissions. Get to a carbon neutral world by 2050, and the best way to do that is get away from fossil fuels. But triage, well, I'm going to use that word. But anyway, it's a matter of us all getting our heads together next year as one. No more silos. One set of problems, one set of solutions.
Professor Lee.
There's no need to prioritize options, and no matter how we prioritize, the end goal is to have an immediate reduction as soon as possible globally. And at the same time, that we need to increase our economic well-being at the same time. So that's the key. We don't want to sacrifice either one of them, but it is possible to achieve both.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut the photo because we are full, and it's one of these few side events that we have people standing. So, Sir, you had a question.
Yeah, Anil Misra from UNESCO. The session today, this morning and now, IPCC Special Report, Cryosphere and Ocean really bringing fresh water and ocean together. the water is the problem, water is the victim of climate change, and water provides solution. That's what I gathered from the report and from your intervention. But I think we also need to find synergies between SDG 14 and 6. We did not really talk much about glacier, snow, and water, which is also highlighted in this report. How to develop synergy between 6 and 14? Any reflection?
Thank you. Professor Lee would like to go first.
Right. Not only 6 and 14, the 1.5 and the land, the ocean, and our previous one, AR5 reports, all indicate critical nexus between water, energy, land, and biodiversity ecosystem services. So, unless we have a very clear understanding and very clear way of resolving the current problems of lagging behind the goal of having immediate reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, we will jeopardize water problems, water shortage problems, food security problems, biodiversity problems. It's all related. And now, the clear message is that we need to have immediate reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. That's one clear message, and it is possible.
And the main two outcomes from the Sustainable Blue Economy Conference held in Nairobi, which 10,000 people turned up, by the way, from all over Africa. The two main outcomes. First one was, don't talk about blue economy if you're talking about just one more linear exploitation of finite planetary resources. Talk about sustainable blue economy and we're in business. But the other big outcome was you can't talk about just the ocean and marine coastal ecosystems without bringing in lakes and rivers as well. Because lakes and rivers have got exactly the same problem, and it's all one circular water system. 97% of the water on the ocean is on the planet is in the ocean. But for human beings, what's in the lakes and the rivers is so important to us. And what we do to that water when it's coming from the mountaintop down to the lagoon is what matters, because that's what makes the difference between a healthy coastal ecosystem and an unhealthy one. So we cannot see SDG 6 and SDG 14 in separation. They're one and the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is Charles Parker from Uppsala University in Sweden, and my question is for Professor Lee. I was very interested to hear that you called for more social science research about policy making. And this brings me to my question about the IPCC's role, which has always strived to be policy relevant but not prescriptive. Considering the urgency of the problem that we face for dealing with climate change, should the IPCC try to become more prescriptive in the recommendations it's making for what should be done, the time that it needs to be done?
No, we don't need to be policy prescriptive, but I would rather be somewhat liberal in interpreting what is policy prescriptive, what is not. As long as IPCC as an assessment body of scientific literature indicate scientific findings in terms of a global context, I think we can be said that we are policy relevant but not policy prescriptive. Now, we may be liable to be called policy prescriptive if our message deals with some particular cases impacting certain country or particular region. Then I think it will be a quite prescriptive prescriptive communication. But all of our findings are about the global ramifications of climate issues and response measures. So what we do currently, what we do right now is very much abiding by the policy relevant but not policy prescriptive. And we are not interested in prescribing what the right medicine will be for a particular country, not at all.
Thank you. Madam?
Hi, my name is Kristina Mikulova. I work for the European institutions. I have a quick question for both gentlemen. Part of the conversation at this COP is about industry, and we've heard a lot about aviation and shipping. But curiously for me, we haven't heard anything about the fashion industry. Crucially, fashion industry. Crucially for this conversation, The fashion industry is the second largest consumer of the world's water supply, and it releases the equivalent of 50 billion plastic bottles into the ocean each year. I was wondering if we were doing enough to go seriously by industry, so have a conversation and develop recommendation to help them address the contribution that they're making to the dire situation that we are in right now.
Well, I'll answer that first, then Professor Lee can give you a sensible answer. But I'm so happy the blowtorch is finally being put on the fashion industry. Absolutely. You know, the plastic microfibers, that's what's coming back and going into our babies by the food we're giving them. You know, it's the plastic microfibers that we wash in our oil-based clothing that we've been forced into wearing over the last 50 years, which are being washed in their millions, you know, every day into the ocean in their multitudes. It's coming back to bite us now. You know, that stuff, those particles are crossing the blood-brain barrier. They're crossing the placental barrier. It's serious business, and the fashion industry's got a lot to answer for. But as I said before, finite planetary resources. It's the same thing with fashion industry. Get into recycling and get into natural fibers the way our grandparents used to. That would be okay. But we you know, this whole plastic plague that's been put on the world, that's going to take some fighting to get ourselves out of the mess we've created for ourselves.
Professor, right. The issues about the how industries can participate in this mitigation activities specifically addressed by one of our working groups in IPCC. And generally, the issues related to industry that can be addressed in two different aspects. One is from the supply side, and the other is demand side. And from the supply side, IPCC has been doing very laborious and good work in understanding the technology aspect and cost aspect, the finance aspect of it. And I'm sure that an ongoing assessment will probably look into this fashion segment of the industry as well. But the demand side, it is the first time in IPCC's history that we are going to look into the consumer side of this equation. We have one specific dedicated chapter looking into the demand. And now, you know, we know very well that it is one of the challenge for the analysts to analyze, to understand the changes in consumer preference. And we saw that the examples of rapidly changing consumer taste, rapidly changing consumer preferences in all segments of consumer goods, and that reflect a very significant behavioral choices on the part of the consumer, and we need to understand why such changes occur in what specific period, what in specific in context. So we will be very diligent in trying to understand the demand side of this equation, and wait for about 3 more years, then you will see the result of your questions.
Thank you, Professor. You allow me 30 seconds to say that the UN is working on a sustainable fashion initiative. I know good colleagues from the UNFCCC, Nicholas, and my colleagues from UNEP, Isabella, they're working on this, and I hope we will see something. I promised Ambassador of Granada that I'll give her the floor for one question, and then you say.
Thank you very much. I also want to join my thanks to the scientists led by Professor Lee for the sterling report on the possibility and necessity of 1.5 degrees. I'm from Grenada, and we were in the small island states from Fiji to Grenada and back. We were champions, I must say, not the only ones, but we were certainly champions for the argument that 1.5 was a necessity and it's possible. So thanks to you and your team of scientists for that. You have put a new proposal on the table, and that is, others are saying it, but what you said today is that if we remove the market distortions, that can unleash a lot of benefits around energy sort of energy alternatives, and that in fact could push us closer to the 1.5 and so on. And my good former head of the president of General Assembly, my old boss, my good friend, my global advocate, Peter Thompson, says that the market is not sufficient. Policies are important, and action. I want to ask the two of you to what extent, under the rubric of leave no one behind, we could take on board the popular sector. Popular sector has a lot of scientific and traditional knowledge. Would the IPCC ever consider, a scientific report on climate change from popular knowledge, popular science, and would that be of use? And for Peter Thompson, how do we take on board all that the popular sector is doing, whether it's the informal economy or it's civil society activism, artists, the fashion industry, young people? I think there is a gap there that the SDGs cannot be attained until and unless the popular sector in its diversity and creativities are taken on board both in the science and in the policy. Do you agree? What are your comments? Thank you.
Can I just ask our moderator to ask Paul Holthus to say his question as well, because he represents the World Ocean Council, which is private sector, so it relates well to Ambassador Williams' question. I'll allow Professor and I to respond in one go.
Okay, yes, and then Professor Lee also to respond.
Thanks, Peter. So Paul Holthus with the World Ocean Council. So we are the global blue economy, business and investment organization. So we bring together all the ocean industries, the investment community and others around sustainable development and the SDGs and tackling climate change in various ways as part of that. So my point would also, and thank you, Ambassador, good to see you again, would also echo that the need to engage the whole of society in tackling the ocean climate nexus here, and that one of the key points then is to build on science, and these points of pragmatism and action is something where we can see, although we have complications with the markets, certainly the business community, leadership companies from around the world are ready to take pragmatic action to deal with climate and ocean sustainable development. So we had at the most recent annual gathering of the global business and investment, ocean business and investment community, we invited the IPCC, Hans Otto Portner, to come present the report. And so my question would be, building on what we've just heard, how can we best connect the work of the IPCC and the science outputs to the business community to really get directly to those that are ready to take action? So we tried to do that by having that briefing a few weeks ago at the annual business conference on ocean sustainable development. But I think we need to take that role of business as part of, from these last two interventions, as part of the whole of society, and really bring the IPCC process and results directly to the business community to help incite that action. And we really had that kind of feedback a couple of weeks ago when we had the IPCC report to the business community.
So Professor Lee, two questions now. One on popular indigenous science and the second on the business sector.
Thank you very much. The IPCC has been trying to incorporate as much as possible the wealth of indigenous knowledge, and the process of the assessment in IPCC usually relied on peer-reviewed literature, and we try to find ways to incorporate indigenous knowledge. Sometimes those indigenous knowledge may not be reflected in the peer-reviewed the literature. So we rely on the inputs from our bureau members, inputs from our lead authors, and we try to use the resources available in the localities around the world to just catch up this important essence of the indigenous knowledge. And we will keep on improving our capability of capturing the indigenous knowledges. And with regard to how we link these findings to the business community, and through we do have an outreach programs in order to disseminate our findings to various interest groups and stakeholders. And that outreach also included the representatives from the business community. And I have a question to you, because I'd like to hear from you that how much of impact of our outreach activities have had on the business community so far? Could you tell us whether it has been, whether have you seen some noticeable impact on business community of our outreach activities, about implementing our findings?
With the moderator's permission, I'll go ahead and respond. So I would say at one level, the overall ocean business community, and maybe the business community in general, those top tier companies that really pay attention to climate change and the SDGs, they see the IPCC reports coming out and they're aware of them. I'd say that's an unfortunately small percentage of the overall business community, and really getting those results out, and most importantly, what those science results mean for action by the business community, that's a challenge, and that's where we need to work together. I think intermediary organizations like ourselves can help be a portal to magnify and accelerate the dissemination of that information and from the science community, from the IPCC reports, and turning it into actionable intelligence. I would have to say that, and this is why we had one of your lead authors come present the results of the report to the global ocean business and investment community gathering that we have every year, the Sustainable Ocean Summit, because we know that the vast majority of the rank and file ocean business and investment community is not reading the IPCC reports. We need to bring the scientists to the ocean business and investment gatherings, and that's what we will continue to do to help fill that gap in communication. So happy to work with you more actively on that.
So my response on the private sector thing to Ambassador Williams' comment would be that when we were leading the United Nations, we were pushing SDGs. Our main job was trying to get the SDGs accepted around the world, right? Why? It's the survival plan for humanity, that and the Paris Agreement. What else have we got? So we were really pushing it during that 71st session. And you know what? I used to tell everybody, including all the 193 member states when they gathered together, we were not succeeding. And I knew that from personal polls. Everywhere I went, whether it was taxi drivers or hotel check-in clerks or waiters, I'd say to them, what are the SDGs? I say, what sexually transmitted disease? No, nobody knew what the SDGs were. But there was one community that did know. And that was the governments knew. Every cabinet knew about it, and they were using it as a sort of free development plan for their country. I mean, it's just basically written that way. Why wouldn't you just adopt all the SDGs and make that your national development plan? But there was one sector that really got it, and that was the business, especially the big corporations. They got it. They understood that this was the growth of the future. They could make money out of the SDGs, number one. But number two, they could also see that they were in extreme danger of being Kodak'd, that their business model, that their products could well go out of business pretty soon if they weren't up to speed on what the SDGs actually represented in the world. And so I've found that generally business is very connected with the SDGs. And that would be my response. As far as your original question to me about the popular culture, definitely, it depends so much on the youth for this, to drive us, to kick us, and what they're doing is absolutely the right thing to do, just to heighten the ambition. Thanks.
Thank you, Pastor. So with 4 minutes to go, if there's no other question, I would like to have a final question to both Professor Lee and Ambassador Thompson. We are heading in a little bit more than 6 months in the Oceans Conference in Lisbon, 5 to 9 of June, which is the second UN Oceans Conference after the one that Ambassador Thompson convened back in 2017. And I remember in this conference I met Ambassador Thompson and I asked him what we should do in ESCAP to take your message back? And he said, make oceans the raison d'etre of ESCAP. And that's what we're trying to do. So my question first to Professor Lee would be, what are the 2 or 3 key messages that you think the special report on the oceans and the cryosphere should send to this ocean conference in Lisbon?
Well, I hope that by the time you meet this special conference, we should be world would be in the position of announcing that we have finally achieved global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions.
Fantastic. That's the best message ever. Ambassador Thompson, what would you like to see in the next 6 months coming to your conference?
Look, I think we're very much on track for it. Professor, we'll definitely be expecting you and the IPCC to be heavily involved in the science aspect, because in fact the theme of the Ocean Conference this time is science and innovation, scaling it up. But 2 things. One, the conference exists because of SDG 14, right? SDG 14, this thing on my lapel, exists because we saw, because we're from the islands, that the ocean was sick, that life in the ocean was fading. And so that's why we, the Pacific Islands and the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean Islands, got together in a coalition, pushed for this against huge opposition from huge countries, let me tell you. And then friends got together from more like-minded countries with us, and we managed to force this against very strong political will against into the SDGs. Having got an SDG 14 to save life in the ocean, what did they do? We wanted something to make sure that it was being implemented with integrity. How were we going to do that? That's why we got the first UN Ocean Conference, and that's why Kenya and Portugal are hosting the second one next year. Keep the global community's feet to the fire on implementation of this SDG 14. Okay, so that's why we're all going to be in Lisbon again. My last point, this is my second one, my last point is that when you're sick, you go to the doctor. Okay? The ocean is sick. So where's the ocean doctor? Science, ocean scientists. And we went to them. And now we've got these great in the sense of so authoritative reports. They're not good news, but they point us in the direction of the symptoms, the diagnosis that's going to be required to prescribe the treatment to get the patient healthy again. And I would suggest to you that treatment, while it is getting underway now, won't actually mature until 2030, when we're going to have to make actually some very difficult decisions on this planet by about 2030. And in the interim, we have the UN Decade for Ocean Science. Now that decade is going to be a continuation of the great work that's been done by IPCC, IPBES, IUCN and others, so that by the end of that decade, instead of knowing only 5% about the ocean's ecosystem, which is about what we know now, somewhere between 5 and 10%. Imagine, the majority of the planet, but we only know 5 to 10% about its ecosystem. At the end of that decade, thanks to our doctors, our ocean scientists, we will probably know, I don't know, somewhere between 90% and 95% probably. And at that point, we can make some decisions about the very serious things we're going to have to consider doing around about 2030, and I won't go into those right now, other than say we've, there is this plan now. It's not like we're just sort of lying down and letting it all roll over us. We've got a plan to fight back, and we just have to implement it with integrity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, we're just 1 minute before the close. I will not dare to summarize because I was not here to moderate, as I told you, I was here to facilitate, and everybody is taking its messages. I would like just to give a very big thank to Professor Lee, because he represents all these thousands of scientists that they try to put rationality back on the decision making. And Ambassador Thompson, because he's one of the policy advocates that try to do things not optimistic or pessimistic, but pragmatism. And invite all of you to give them a round of applause with a big applause.